All right, how's it going, y'all? So today I've compiled a list of 8 things I would love Synology to do, ideally in 2024, to really improve Synology DSM, in my opinion. This is an absolute ramble of a list. It crosses everything, and there is no order whatsoever on it. But these are all just my thoughts of just things that really drive me crazy that could make Synology so much better. I've been full-time IT consulting. I do a lot of work with Synology for about a year now. And these are all the things that I have found people having issues with and things that could really just improve the overall experience without adding that much difficulty, at least in theory. I'm not going to include things that I would love to see, like Synology taking up ZFS for their larger file systems, just because it's just not going to happen. It's a level of effort that is beyond the scope of this. These are all things that should be not too terrible to set up and use, that I think would make the entire Synology NAS experience significantly better for a lot of their customers. I already filmed half of this video once and I lost it due to a power outage, so hopefully we get through this before the incoming storm. But first, I'd like to take a quick break to thank the sponsor of today's video, Aura. Are you tired of constantly getting spam phone calls to the point where you don't even answer your phone anymore? I used to get tons of those too, until I signed up to Aura to test out their service when they sponsored the channel last year. And genuinely, since signing up for Aura last year, I don't remember the last time I got a spam phone call. All right, so why does this work? There are these massive data brokers who have tons of information on everyone. And they sell this information to robocallers, spammers for cheap. And that is a cause of getting a lot of those spam phone calls. So what Aura does is you consent to them to be able to request each one of these companies, and there's tons of them, remove your data, because these data brokers are legally required to remove your data if you request them to, but they make it really hard. And that's where Aura comes in. Aura does this all for you. Aura also does so much more to protect you and your family from online threats you can't see. It's really easy to set up, so you don't have to download several different apps to get things like parental controls, antivirus, password manager, VPN, and so much more. Instead, you get everything in a single service and a single price. Let Aura do the hard work of keeping you safe online so you can focus on other tasks with peace of mind. Aura is offering SpaceRex viewers a 2-week free trial. Go to aura.com/SpaceRex or click the link to the description to start protecting your information today. Thanks to Aura for sponsoring this section of the video. Now on to the rest of the video. So right off the bat, number one is I would love for them to have the ability to have a set self-signed certificate duration. For those of you who don't know, whenever you set up a Synology, it always creates one default self-signed certificate. And back in DSM 6, I believe this was a 30-year certificate, so it would expire after 30 years. This was great because it never changed, so you could trust it and you would never see that message again. Then, in about DSM 7, somewhere around there, they changed this to a 1-year certificate, which people are going to have their NAS for more than 1 year, so it became a problem. I believe the reason they actually changed it from a 30-year certificate to a 1-year certificate is actually credit card requirements. So if you process credit card data, they've got specific security requirements for your network. And one of them is that you cannot have anything publicly accessible with a self-signed certificate that is more than 1 year old. And I actually had a client who had that issue, and literally they didn't even need it open, so I just turned it off, and boom, they passed their next inspection. So I think that is why they changed it. Makes total sense. However, it introduced a whole slew of other issues when that happened. For one, and luckily they did fix this, is active backup of business is not going over the internet most of the time. It's normally using the local signed certificate, which you want to still use SSL encryption on. Well, boom, now you would having to relink all your devices once a year. Really annoying. They did fix that, so in active backup for business, you can create a self-signed 30-year certificate or 10-year certificate over there, which is great. And funny enough, I have actually installed active backup for business, probably 10 client machines, just to get that 30-year certificate. But active backup for business is not the only application that needs that. The biggest one is OpenVPN. OpenVPN uses that certificate for its clients. And so what is going to happen is once a year, you've got to resend out all new OpenVPN certificates when this self-signed certificate goes from 2025 to 2026 because it auto-renews after it expires. What I would love to see is not that hard. just be able to hit add new certificate, and just have a third option here. Generate self-signed certificate with a duration on there. That would be great and allow people to use this and not have any of these issues. There are a ton of things that use this self-signed certificate for a lot of people. FTPS, I know a lot of people use that still. Replication, if you want to use encrypted replication. The VPN server, already talked about. Synology Drive Share Sync. All that stuff will break once a year and you have to reconfigure it if you're not using a valid certificate because you don't want to open up to the internet fully to get that Let's Encrypt certificate. So I would really love it for them to just have a 30-year option and you can just say how long you want it. It should not be that hard to add on in, and it gives users the flexibility to choose what they need. Number 2 is to make Synology Drive more like Dropbox. Dropbox has gone away with their unlimited plan, so is Google Drive. And so tons of users are flooding to Synology, contacting me and saying, this is how we set up Dropbox. Do the exact same thing on Synology. And you just can't, unfortunately, because of the core way that Dropbox works versus how Synology Drive works. What I would love for Synology Drive to be able to do is simple. You should be able to right-click share with a specific user in Synology Drive, and have it automatically download to that user's computer if they enroll in that. There are 2 things that currently stand in that way. 1, if you want to have shared with me enabled, that's where their computer can download files that are shared with them, just like I was talking about. You have to have another team folder or personal space mounted. So when I've set this up for users, I've literally had to right click and create an entire team folder with no data in it that is synced to a bunch of their contractors' computers, just because Synology Drive will not let you set up a shared with me folder unless you first set up a team folder. Really annoying. So that's number 1 thing I would love to remove. And number 2 is a simple option to say automatically download whenever something's shared with me. Currently, the only way to do this is you actually have to go in after somebody shares with you and then say, yes, download. It would be great within the app to just say, yeah, always download, and then have an option to just remove out which ones you'd like to. So you can just say, clean up and say, I don't want this folder, this folder, this folder downloaded in my computer, but I can download them later on. That should not be that hard to implement. All the pieces are already there. It would be a huge game changer for a ton of specifically video production houses. I know a ton of video production houses who would love to be able to share one-off projects with clients and have it just be in their regular file system and have it sync to their contractors' computers. Would be so nice to set that up and should not be that hard to implement. Really, really, really useful for honestly Synology's biggest user base, in my opinion. All right, on to number 3. Allow NASs to use Wireguard for both Wireguard server and Wireguard client. So even though the vast majority of IT administrators for companies are not going to use Wireguard because Wireguard does not have username password authentication, and as much as I'd love Synology to build a Wireguard client for Windows, Mac, Linux, iPhone, Android, I don't think it's happening. So it's still going to be useful for people who are okay setting up their own pre-shared keys and doing the full Wireguard implementation themselves. I don't think most companies would use it, but it's still really useful to have the ability to use a Wireguard server if needed. Wireguard has much better performance than OpenVPN, and there's a lot of protocols that use it, and I think it would just be a lot more useful to be able to set up a Wireguard server if required. I don't think a ton of people would use it, but it'd still be useful to have. And on top of that, it'd also be great to do the exact same thing with a Wireguard client, so you can connect to another Wireguard server. This would be phenomenal for setting up 2 Synologies that are synced together, so you could do an offsite backup completely encrypted, just using Wireguard between the 2 units. I think that would be the best use case for it. And Wireguard's built into the Linux kernel at this point. It should not be that hard to add on in. And there's a ton of use cases specifically for linking Synologies together that I think Wireguard would be great for. All right, so that was number 4. On to number 5 is something you're going to have to stay with me for a minute. Quickconnect Pro. I would love to see Synology sell a Quickconnect Pro that is just like all the rest of Quickconnect, except it removes out the throttling. Maybe it gives you 1 gig of bandwidth, maybe 100 megs of bandwidth. Honestly, 100 megs of bandwidth would be a huge upgrade for a lot of people. This takes a little bit of backstory to explain here. If you're not familiar with Quickconnect, Quickconnect has 4 different ways it can connect. Whenever you use Quickconnect, it does a scan. First, it sees, are you on the local network? Well, if so, just connect straight to it. That's where you see the IP address in the actual server name. Then, if you're not local, but the ports are open, it'll actually just go straight there direct using the actual ports in the browser. And that's where you'll see .direct.quickconnect.2. So those two are the single fastest way of operating because your computer is directly talking with the Synology. So there's no bottlenecks there. The only bottleneck is the upload and download speed of the respective services. But if the ports aren't open and you're remote, the next thing it does is it tries this hole punch, where it kind of opens up a port and can allow a direct connection. In my experience, it's either not fast or it doesn't work, because I very rarely ever see people getting good speeds without the ports open. So now, in this fourth case, this is where the ports are not open, you're remote, and the hole punch did not work, which is where most people are if they don't have the ability to have a public IP address. Well, Quickconnect still is great. It's still going to let you connect. But the only way to do it with the way the internet works is it's actually got to go and talk to a Quickconnect relay server. So the way the internet works is every connection needs a server and a client. And the server generally needs a port open. So that way you can talk directly to it. If neither the server nor the client have ports open, what you actually have to do is you have to have a middleman that has ports open. And that's the Quickconnect relay server. So the way this works is if it can't establish any other connection, what the Quickconnect relay server will do is it will open a connection to your NAS and it'll open a connection to your computer. And it will literally relay the information back and forth in between your NAS and your computer. Great. It's working. The problem is this costs money. This costs bandwidth for Synology. And since they don't sell Quickconnect as a service, it's just with the initial purchase, Synology doesn't make any money on this anymore. So they bottleneck it, they throttle it, because they pay for every kilobyte you upload. They throttle it enough where it works to back up your photos and stuff like that. So home users generally won't even notice. But business users who are in countries outside the US do notice. And it would be phenomenal to be able to pay 10, 20 bucks a month to have a full gig symmetric through Quickconnect relay servers. That way businesses who don't have public IP addresses could still use Quickconnect and still get the full throughput out of it. And I think this would be huge. The biggest problem I see with this is this explanation took long enough. I don't know how they'd market it. It's one of those things where it's like, you don't know you need it unless you really understand the back end of Quickconnect and why it's there. And that's really not what Quickconnect's for. So it's kind of a weird gray area, and I don't think it's easy to market, and so I think that's one reason why it may never happen. But I'd still love to see it. I'd love to, even if you had to like contact Synology and they didn't tell you about it, because so many people would absolutely pay 20 bucks a month for this. I work with a lot of businesses who this is the reason why they're still paying a couple $100 a month Dropbox, because they do not have a public IP address. So that was number 5. Quickconnect Pro. Synology, you can have that one for free, by the way. Sorry, scratch that. That was number 4. Number 5 is actually something to do with Docker. And Docker is now Container Manager when you download the package center. But I would love a way to make Docker folder permissions easier through the UI. One really annoying thing about the way Docker works is Docker containers run as a UID, basically a unique user on the NAS. And some containers allow you to specify the UID, some don't. The thing is, Synology does not have any way to say this UID can run on this folder. So instead, you either have to do it via SSH, or you have to set permissions to everybody having access to something. I would love to see Synology make this easier. There's 2 ways of doing it. They could either allow you to, instead of using folder-based redirects, instead you could create a mount with a share and just have that in a specific location on the NAS. So that way the share handles the permissions, so it's a volume. So Docker would essentially create a volume just where you say it to be, and that will handle all the permissions, so we won't have this error anymore. And then option B, which is not as elegant, but would be easier to implement, would just be to allow you to edit and add UIDs in the actual shared folder menu. So I'd be able to come in here, create a new folder, right click on it and say properties, permission, and say UID 2934. Allow them read write, where my UID of my Docker container would be 2934. So either one of those would do. Right now, it is an absolute mess, and tons of Docker containers don't work right because of it, and so many other errors. I would love to see that get fixed for sure. Once again, not that hard to implement. On to number 6, we are coming back to Quickconnect, and this is something I think would be awesome. Simplified Quickconnect permissions. I would love to see the ability to say, okay, if somebody's connecting to your Quickconnect, they can't access the admin console, or they can only access X, Y, and Z through Quickconnect. And you could also say they're only in the US and a bunch of stuff. I think they can make a very nice, very slick menu for Quickconnect in allowing specific access to specific apps, permissions, and things like that. They're close. This right here is really, really, really close, but I think they could take it to the next level and include things like, okay, if they're on a local IP address, they're allowed in, and really make it nice and clean. And I think a little bit of work in here could make it way more useful, because as of right now, I very rarely ever dive into this with people because it's not granular enough and you don't have as many options as you'd like. That's one that's a little bit out there, but I think it could be really nice for especially geo restriction. So you could say, yeah, allow Quickconnect, but only US IP addresses. They're close with this, but you have to do it through the firewall rules, and it makes it kind of confusing because of that. I think they can make it a lot easier to have this all self-contained within Quickconnect. Number 7 is make it easier to download your computer apps. Okay, so I'm going to pull up a web browser right here, and I'm going to show you what it takes to download Synology Drive. And this is what I have to explain to clients all the time. So one, you could go through here, and they have made this easier. So when you click on it, this pops up. Really glad that's there, but that's still hard to explain. What you have to do, guaranteed to get there, is tell them, go to Synology.com. You scroll down to downloads. You then have to talk them through what this is. And they have to put in a NAS number. None of this actually really matters. And then they have to go over to desktop apps after it goes through this little search. Just to get here, just to get so that they can download Drive Client, Synology Assistant, Active Backup for Business Agent. So hard to get there. I wish for the most basic apps, I'm talking Synology Drive, Active Backup for Business, Synology Assistant, Surveillance Station. Those most basic apps, I would love to see a link just on the bottom here, call it apps. I don't know, maybe make downloads easier. Just say, hey, DSM web computer apps. Or also have the ability to easily generate a link to that page so we don't have to come through and do it every single time. I think that would make it a lot easier because it's one of those things that's like, all right, I'm sorry, you've got to come here, 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 and here. And there's no like just easy link to get there every single time. All right, so now rounding off our very last one is going to be about Synology Photos. There's actually a fair amount of things that make Synology Photos hard for people to use, and I'm going to show them here. So first off, by default, Synology Photos is like the one application that users do not have default access to. I think they should. So by default, once we install Synology Photos, if we come down into our application privileges, we're going to see that all the apps people have default allowed to, except for Synology Photos and Universal Search, but that's much less used. They have access to Drive, why not Photos? It's so much so that because everybody's used to everybody having access to all the applications, nobody even comes in here to allow it. And so people are like, my spouse can't hook up Synology Photos. I set them up as a user. What's going on? It's because by default, Synology does not have Synology Photos allowed to all users. So I actually almost always just set this whenever I'm setting up a client's machine because it's just confusing. So that is number one. Just add Synology Photos as a default application for all users. And just don't give them access to shared space. They've sandboxed in just like Drive is. with their own personal space anyway. All right, so that was number 1. Number 2, and they're getting close, make the ability to set up the shared space easier for people who you don't want to be able to dump files to. It would be great to be able to set permissions on the shared space that did not completely ruin the great functionality of the timeline view. So right now, the way you handle shared space is through your permissions right here, set access permissions. And they've done great because now you can specify who has access to what things with this custom permission, and you get to say, okay, which folder do they have access to, and a whole bunch of stuff. The problem is, if you do anything other than full access, now they can't see the timeline view. So it kind of ruins the magic of the shared space, in my opinion, because now they can't see the timeline view. This is even true if you set them as read-only access to the whole thing, which a lot of people want me to set their parents to read-only access because the parents break stuff all the time. I would love to be able to do that. I'd also love them to be able to only upload and maybe delete files they uploaded, but not delete other people's. A lot of things like that would be very nice to be able to set, but you can't because it ruins shared space and it ruins a lot of the functionality of it, in my opinion. I would also love to be able to see that you can say, okay, I've got all these different folders, and you can kind of set access permissions between all of them. And people who aren't allowed to one folder, they just don't see the images in that folder, rather than not being able to see the entire timeline view of shared space. I go over it in another video, but I think it would make it a lot more useful. Finally, number 3 is one that people are always asking me for, and that is they want to be able to specify a location for their JPEGs for the shared space that is not in the photo folder. At least you can rename it, but I would love to be able to easily say, hey, yeah, there's this great UI. You just right click and say, yes, this is where I want shared space to be. And it'd be awesome to have a little UI that says, okay, this folder, this folder, this folder, this folder, this folder, across multiple shared folders on your NAS, all come into Synology Photos shared space. People have been asking for that forever. I don't know if it's going to happen. That's a bit of a wish. All right. Well, that is my rambling, all my different things I'd love Synology to do. Go and leave anything else you'd like to see them change down in the comments below. And if you want to hire me, there's a link for that down in the description below. All right, have a good one. Bye.